I always thought if things were going to fall apart between Sarah and me, I'd see it coming. Like a slow fade. Arguments, distance, silence, something gradual. But sometimes the biggest shifts happen in a moment so ordinary you almost miss it. That moment for me came in a hotel ballroom in Chicago. Her boss's company was throwing this big anniversary event. 40 years in the industry or something like that. Black tie, skyline view, everyone dressed to impress. Sarah asked me to come along. Said it was important. Not mandatory, but it would mean a lot. I'd been to a few of these work functions before. Same catered food, same office politics dressed up in formal wear, but she looked so excited about it that I didn't say no. I even wore the gray suit she liked, the one I usually save for weddings or job interviews. We checked in late that afternoon. The room was decent, sleek, modern, one of those corporate chic places with overpriced snacks and a view of the parking garage. She disappeared into the bathroom with her curling iron and makeup bag while I laid on the bed, scrolling through emails and watching some local news. When she came out almost an hour later, I actually sat up straight. She looked stunning. Hair done up in soft waves. A black dress that fell just below her knees. Elegant, simple, but with just enough shimmer to catch the light. She wore heels I didn't even know she owned. New ones, probably. I stood to kiss her, but she was already reaching for her clutch, saying we'd be late if we didn't leave now. We took the elevator down in silence. I chalked it up to nerves. At the event, the ballroom was packed. Round tables with name cards, floral centerpieces, champagne towers, and waiters weaving through the crowd like dancers. A jazz trio played near the back wall, and Sarah was immediately swallowed into a sea of colleagues. I stuck close behind her at first, letting her introduce me to people whose names I'd forget 5 seconds later. And then I lost her. Not literally. She was just across the room, maybe 50 feet away, but it felt like she'd disappeared into a version of herself I barely recognized. She was laughing louder than I'd seen her laugh in weeks. Animated, radiant, and surrounded by people who looked at her like she was the star of the show. I made my way to the bar, ordered a whiskey neat, tried to act like I wasn't keeping one eye trained on her. I watched her glide through the room, always leaning in when someone spoke, always with a hand on someone's shoulder or arm, like she'd known them for years. Then I saw him, tall, dark hair, navy suit, no tie. He was already seated at the table when Sarah came over and plopped down next to him, placing her hand casually on his knee as she laughed at something he said. I froze for a second. You ever get that weird heat in your chest when your brain's not sure what you're seeing? That was me. At first, I told myself I must have misread it. Maybe she was just leaning in, maybe the angle was weird, maybe I was being dramatic. But then her hand stayed there. 10 seconds. 20. Long enough that I stopped counting. Long enough for me to realize this wasn't one of those passing touches people give each other at parties. This was intentional. An int asterisk mate. Familiar. My stomach dropped. I walked over slowly. The man didn't see me at first. Sarah did. She looked up and smiled. Not the kind of smile you give your husband when you're happy to see him, but the kind that says play along. Like she was trying to keep things smooth in front of the group. I leaned in and said quietly, "You know your hand's still on his knee, right?" She blinked, then pulled it back like the idea had never crossed her mind. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, keeping that fake smile pasted on her face. "You know what I'm talking about," I said, not angry, just confused. Hurt, maybe. That didn't look like nothing. She rolled her eyes, rolled them, and let out a small sigh. "Please don't start this here. Not tonight." Now the guy was watching us, and a few of the people at the table had gone quiet. Sarah cleared her throat and leaned toward me, voice barely audible. "You're reading way too much into this. You always do this." "Do what?" "Get jealous. Over nothing." I looked at her, and for a moment, it felt like I was staring at someone I didn't know. I wanted to say something else, something that would make sense of the knot in my chest, but the words wouldn't come. She turned back to the group. "Sorry," she said with a little laugh. "He's just being overprotective. You know how husbands are." The table laughed. The man smiled politely, but didn't say much. Maybe he was smart enough to know he shouldn't. And me? I stood there, the fool with the drink in his hand, pretending it was all okay. I didn't make a scene, didn't pull her aside or demand answers. I just backed off, walked back to the bar, and downed the rest of my drink in one go. The rest of the night was a blur. I talked to a few people, nodded through some conversations I didn't care about, and tried to act like everything was fine. But the image of her hand on his knee wouldn't leave me alone. I couldn't stop seeing it. The way her fingers just rested there, like they'd been there before. When we got back to the hotel room later that night, I expected her to say something, to explain. But she didn't. She tossed her clutch on the chair, kicked off her heels, and started wiping off her makeup like nothing had happened. I asked again, "What was that about?" She didn't look at me, just kept rubbing her mascara off with a tissue. "You seriously want to do this right now?" "Yes," I said. "I do." She finally turned to me. "It was nothing. God, you're so sensitive lately. I can't even talk to people without you making it into some big thing." "Touching his leg isn't talking," I said, my voice low. "That wasn't friendly. That was—" "What?" she snapped. "Flirting? Cheating? Is that what you're going to accuse me of now?" "I didn't say that. But you're thinking it, right?" I stared at her. I couldn't say yes because even I didn't know what I was thinking. All I knew was that something about it felt wrong. Like I'd just been shoved out of my own relationship. "You're making something out of nothing," she said again. "And honestly, it's exhausting. These nights are important for my career. Can't you just be normal for once?" That hit harder than I expected. I turned away, sat on the edge of the bed, and ran my hands through my hair. "Forget it," I muttered. She didn't say anything else. Just finished her routine, climbed into bed, and turned off the lamp on her side. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathe, wondering why it felt like I was already sleeping next to a stranger. I didn't bring it up again the next morning. Sarah was already in full corporate mode before I even opened my eyes. She was standing near the window in her robe, phone in one hand, coffee in the other, doing that hushed but intense voice she always used when speaking to people she wanted something from. I watched her for a moment, how easily she slipped back into her element. Polished, composed, untouched by the awkwardness of the night before. If I hadn't been there, you'd never guess anything had happened. She ended the call, noticed me watching her, and offered this distant sort of smile, the kind you give to someone you vaguely recognize at a party. Not the kind you give your husband. "You okay?" she asked, her tone deliberately light. I nodded. "Yeah, just tired." She seemed relieved I wasn't picking the scab again. I wasn't letting it go, not really. I was just trying to figure out what exactly I was dealing with. Because once you see something that doesn't feel right, it's like flipping a switch. Suddenly everything else looks different. Everything starts to feel suspicious, even things you used to shrug off without a second thought. The drive back home was quiet. She scrolled her phone almost the entire time. I glanced over now and then, catching the reflection of her screen in the window. Messages. Slack. Instagram. One time I saw a message preview flash, just a first name, James. No last name, no context. She turned the screen away before I could catch more. I wanted to ask. I didn't. Not yet. That week, I started noticing things. Or maybe I was just finally admitting to myself that I'd noticed them for a while. Like how she never left her phone lying around anymore. She used to leave it on the counter when she showered, or plug it in by the bed when we went to sleep. Now it was glued to her hand, always face down, always on silent. Once, I tried picking it up to hand it to her, and she nearly jumped. "Don't go through my stuff," she snapped, snatching it back. "I wasn't," I said, startled. It buzzed. "I thought it might be important." "It's not," she said quickly. "Just work." Another thing, her clothes. She'd always had style, sure. But over the last few months, she'd started buying things I'd never see her wear. Tags still on them, shoved in the back of the closet. Skirts, heels, blouses with slits or cutouts. Stuff she didn't wear around me. I asked once, jokingly, "You going clubbing without me?" She rolled her eyes and said, There for events. You wouldn't get it. And the late nights. Yeah, the late nights became routine. What used to be occasional became 3, sometimes 4 times a week. Always with the same line. We've got a product launch coming. It's crazy right now. Fair enough. She worked in marketing. Deadlines, pitches, clients, it made sense. Until it didn't. One night, maybe a month before the Chicago trip, she came home around 11 p.m. in someone else's coat. I remember it clearly. It was a beige trench, nicer than anything she owned. When I asked about it, she said, "Oh, I left mine in the car. Swapped with a coworker when we were leaving the bar." Bar? That hadn't come up before. She waved it off. It was just for a drink after the presentation. You were already asleep. Thing is, I wasn't. I had waited up. She didn't say anything about going out afterward. And it wasn't just the coat that felt off. It was her face. A slight flush in her cheeks. Hair a little too messy for just a work thing. I remember thinking, this doesn't feel like someone who's been in a conference room. I brushed it off. I wanted to believe her. I still did then. But the seeds were already in the soil. Another memory came back to me a few days after Chicago. She was going on a trip. Said she was visiting an old college friend for the weekend. Someone named Rachel. I didn't think much of it at the time. But that night, I noticed she spent almost an hour on her phone, deleting messages. Not a few, all of them. When I asked why, she laughed nervously. You ever clean out your inbox? It was a mess. It didn't make sense. Sarah wasn't the type to randomly Marie Kondo her texts. Not unless she didn't want something seen. All of it added up slowly, like puzzle pieces falling into place, even though I didn't know what picture I was building yet. The brain does this thing where it protects you from the full weight of realization. Drip by drip, it feeds you just enough to handle. And once it's too obvious to ignore, it no longer feels like discovery. It feels like confirmation. One night I couldn't sleep. She was asleep beside me, breathing softly. Her phone was tucked under her pillow. I stared at the ceiling, running the timeline in my head. When the late nights started, when the new clothes started showing up, how her attitude had subtly shifted toward me. I felt like a guest in my own marriage. Someone she tolerated, not someone she shared her life with. I thought about how she used to call me on her lunch breaks. How she'd text me a picture of her coffee in the morning just because. I hadn't seen those in a while. Months, maybe. I got out of bed and sat in the living room for hours. Just sat there in the dark, thinking. When you're suspicious, everything starts to feel like a clue. A receipt left in her purse. A second pair of shoes in her car that I didn't recognize. Her sudden interest in fitness, even though she'd always claimed to hate the gym. The day she came home and said her coworker James had really helped her through a tough week, then brushed it off like it was nothing. James again. She brought him up just enough to make it sound casual, but not enough for me to ask follow-up questions. Was that on purpose? I started keeping mental notes. Nothing obsessive. Just observations. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Partly because I still didn't have proof, and partly because I wasn't sure I was ready to hear the truth. There's something terrifying about stepping into the moment that changes everything. Once you open that door, you can't close it again. The night before everything became clear, we sat on the couch watching a movie. Something she picked, romantic comedy, nothing memorable. She laughed at all the right moments. Her head rested on my shoulder. She even reached for my hand at one point, and for a second I thought maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just paranoid. Maybe that night in Chicago really was nothing. But then I saw her glance at her phone. And just for a second, half a second, she smiled. Not at the movie. Not at me. But at something on her screen. And I knew. It wasn't a sudden gut punch. It was a quiet ache, deep and cold. The kind of knowing that sinks into your bones. I didn't say anything. Didn't move. I let her stay curled beside me. Let her pretend everything was okay. But I stopped pretending. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know if it was an affair, an emotional connection, or something more subtle. I didn't know how long it had been happening, or how far it had gone. But I knew, in my heart, that I wasn't imagining things. The way she talked, The way she guarded her phone like it held state secrets. The way she smiled at texts meant for someone else. There was a time I trusted her without question. Now I couldn't trust the look in her eyes. That was the part that hurt the most. Not the idea of someone else, but the realization that the woman I married had started hiding pieces of herself from me, and somewhere along the line, I had stopped being the person she shared them with. The hotel had a long, dim hallway that wrapped around the upper floors, reserved for staff and late check-ins. I wasn't supposed to be there. I'd taken a wrong turn after leaving the lounge, or at least that's what I told myself. Truth is, I'd had one too many drinks and wasn't in the mood to sit through another awkward networking conversation with people who couldn't remember my name. Sarah had gone off with some of her colleagues. Again, and I figured I'd call it a night early. But what I found upstairs made sleep impossible. The hallway was quiet. One of those narrow, low-ceiling stretches that smelled like cleaning supplies and overworked HVAC. I turned a corner near the maintenance elevators, and that's when I saw it. Just a flash. A door halfway closed, like it hadn't clicked all the way shut. I didn't mean to look, honestly, but movement caught my eye, and something inside me, the same voice that had been whispering in my gut for weeks, told me to stop. I took a single step closer. That's all I needed. And through that gap, maybe 4 inches wide, I saw her, Sarah, pressed against the wall. Her hands were in his hair. His lips were on her neck. Her dress, the same black dress she'd worn to the event, was bunched slightly at the thigh. I couldn't see his face, but I didn't need to. It was the same guy from the table. The one with the confident smirk. The one whose knee she'd casually touched while I stood 15 feet away. The man I'd been told not to worry about. Because, of course, I was reading into things again. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. For a second, I thought maybe I was having a nightmare. That surreal moment when you're sure your brain is playing tricks on you. But then I heard it. Her laugh. Soft. Familiar. The exact one I'd heard 100 times before. The kind she used to save for me. Then she said something low, breathy, teasing. And he answered with a sound that made my stomach flip. A quiet, pleased chuckle. Confident. Comfortable. Like this wasn't new. I backed away before they noticed. I didn't want to be seen. I didn't want them to have to explain anything. Because for the first time in all those weeks of suspicion and mental gymnastics and second-guessing myself, I didn't need an explanation. I had the truth. It hit me harder than I thought it would. I'd imagined scenarios like this in my head a dozen times, maybe more, played them out like scenes from a movie. Me catching them, confronting her, shouting, demanding answers. But standing there, outside that door, what I felt wasn't rage. It was silence. Heavy, hollow silence. The kind that wraps around your chest and squeezes until your heart forgets how to beat. I walked back to the main elevator, numb. The music from the event was still audible, faintly, through the floorboards. Some pop song she used to sing in the car. I rode the elevator alone, staring at my reflection in the metal paneling. I looked pale, older somehow, broken in a way that hadn't fully reached the surface yet. Back in the room, I sat on the edge of the bed, hands in my lap. The minibar beckoned, but I didn't open it. I didn't want to blur this feeling. I wanted to remember it. Every second, every breath, the way it felt to have my fears confirmed without a doubt. She came in almost an hour later. Hair tousled, lipstick redone but imperfect, like it had been rushed. She smelled different, like a cologne I didn't recognize. There was a faint line on her neck that looked suspiciously like a fading kiss mark. Not quite a bruise. Not quite subtle. "Hey," she said softly, as if testing the waters. "You're up." "Yeah," I replied. My voice sounded small, strained. She paused. "You okay?" I nodded. She didn't press further. Just peeled off her heels, walked to the bathroom, and shut the door. I listened to the water run in the sink, followed by the click of the makeup bag zipper and the soft shuffle of a hotel towel. I waited for her to say something, anything, but she didn't. She climbed into bed beside me minutes later, acting like everything was fine. And for a long time I just laid there staring at the ceiling, the way I had so many nights before. But this time something had changed. I wasn't guessing anymore. I wasn't piecing together a puzzle or interpreting vague signs. I had seen it, heard it, felt it in my bones. This wasn't emotional neglect. This wasn't a misunderstanding or office culture or flirtation gone too far. This was infidelity, physical, intentional, repeated. I thought about all the moments that had led here. The late nights, the coat that wasn't hers, the wiped texts, the smile she gave her phone. All the little red flags I'd convinced myself weren't worth raising hell over. All the signs I'd buried to keep the peace, to protect something that clearly wasn't protecting me back. And the most bitter part? I didn't even have the strength to confront her that night. Not out of fear, but because I wanted her to have the opportunity to lie. One more time. I wanted to see if she could look me in the eye and pretend she loved me. I needed to know how deep the deception ran. So I said nothing. I rolled to the edge of the bed and closed my eyes. I could feel her breathing beside me, calm and even. Maybe she thought she'd gotten away with it. Maybe she thought I really was just tired. Or maybe, worst of all, she didn't even care if I knew. I stayed silent, but my mind wasn't. It was loud with questions I didn't want answers to. How long has it been going on? Did it start before Chicago? Is this the first time she's cheated? Or just the first time I caught her? And then the scariest thought of all. Who is she now? Because the woman lying beside me wasn't the same person I married. She wasn't the woman who used to leave notes in my lunchbox or cry at Pixar movies or dance barefoot in the kitchen. That woman wouldn't do this. That woman would have told me if she was unhappy, would have fought for us, or at least respected me enough to end it first. This person, this version of her, she had secrets, layers, hidden lives. I didn't know her anymore. The next morning, she got up early, said she had to catch up on emails before checkout. She didn't kiss me goodbye. She didn't even look at me for more than a second. On the drive back home, I said almost nothing. She filled the silence with stories from the party. How great the venue was, how funny her coworkers were, how proud her boss looked. I nodded in the right places, pretended to care, pretended I hadn't seen her hands wrapped around another man. Hadn't heard her laugh in a way I hadn't heard in months. I played dumb, and she played innocent. It was a game now, but I wasn't playing to win. I was playing to learn. Because when someone lies to you with that much ease, when they look into your eyes and rewrite reality without blinking, you stop giving them answers. You start collecting them. And I had every intention of collecting them all. Back home, the silence of our house felt heavier than usual. We'd only been gone 2 nights, but when I walked in, it was like stepping into a stage set where the actors had all left. The blinds were drawn, the faint smell of her perfume still hanging in the hallway. For years that scent had been comforting. Now it was a warning. Sarah floated through the house as though nothing had happened. She unpacked her bag with the same efficiency she always had, moved from room to room checking her emails, humming to herself while she made coffee. To anyone else, it would look normal. To me, it felt like watching someone rehearse a role they'd played 100 times before. I didn't ask questions right away. Not because I'd forgiven her, but because I'd decided something important. I wasn't going to confront her empty-handed. I had the image of her and that man in the hotel burned into my head. But I wanted more than a mental **T. I wanted something she couldn't explain away. The first clue showed up almost immediately. On her dressing table, between the scattered makeup brushes and perfume bottles, lay a bracelet I'd never seen before. Gold, delicate, with a tiny heart charm dangling from it. It caught the morning light in a way that made it impossible to ignore. Pretty, I said, keeping my voice casual. New. She didn't even look up from the mirror. Oh no, old thing. Been in a drawer forever. I reached out, picked it up. The clasp was bent, as if it had been pulled off too quickly. Weird. I don't remember you wearing it. That's because I haven't, she said a little too fast. Found it last week. I set it down carefully as though it might break. Ha! We didn't say anything more about it, but the lie was obvious. She'd never been good at lying with her hands. Her voice might stay calm, but her fingers fidgeted, her eyes flicked away. I'd seen it before when she tried to hide surprise parties or Christmas gifts. But this wasn't a gift. This was evidence. That same evening, when she stepped out to run errands, I finally gave in to something I'd been resisting. I opened my laptop, logged into our shared account, and scrolled through the devices linked to her profile. 2 phones showed up, the one she carried everywhere, and an older model she'd supposedly sold or recycled months ago, except it was still there, and still backing up to the cloud. I clicked. What came up wasn't an explosion of incriminating texts. It was quieter than that, which somehow made it worse. Screensh *TS of late-night messages. Calendar invites labeled as team planning that didn't match her work calendar. Notes she'd written to herself. Tiny fragments like, next time, different hotel, and he liked the scarf. And then, buried in the photos folder, a picture of the bracelet. Taken on a hotel nightstand, next to a man's watch. My stomach dropped. I scrolled further, and the name appeared again and again. James. At first in passing, thanks for covering for me today, James. Great meeting, James. And then more in asterisk, mate. Miss you already. Next time will be longer. I can't stop thinking about last night. She hadn't even bothered to delete everything. Or maybe she thought she had. Maybe she didn't realize the backup was still active. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. For weeks I'd been telling myself maybe I was crazy. Maybe I'd misread every sign. But now it was all there in front of me, times, dates, names. All the puzzle pieces lined up, not as guesses but as facts. When she came home later, grocery bags in hand, I could barely look at her. She chatted about some mundane thing at work while she put food in the fridge. I nodded at the right times, my mind still on the photos, the bracelet, the bent clasp. That night, after she fell asleep, I went back into the backup and read more. She'd saved entire conversations. Little digital confessions to a man who wasn't me. Memories of meetings that couldn't possibly be explained as work-related to anyone but the 2 of them. One stood out. Chicago was perfect. The way you looked at me when no one was watching. I keep replaying it. Followed by his reply, next time, no hiding, just us. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark. For a moment, I wondered if I was overreacting, if maybe they were just playing some emotional game that hadn't gone physical. But then I remembered the hotel hallway, the sound of her laugh against his mouth. There was no question left to ask. It was real. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was realizing how easily she'd hidden it. How normal she'd acted. How she could text him while sitting next to me. How she could smile across the dinner table and plan her next escape at the same time. I thought about all the nights she came home late, smelling like perfume she didn't own. About the coat swap. About the sudden fitness kick. About the bracelet with the bent clasp. Every lie had been small enough to swallow on its own. Together, they formed a truth too large to ignore. I didn't confront her that night either. Not yet. Instead, I lay awake next to her again, feeling the cold wall of space between us, even though our shoulders were inches apart. Her breathing was steady. She might have been dreaming. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the heater, thinking about the man named James and the watch on the hotel nightstand. The next day, when she left for work, I opened her drawer. The bracelet was gone. She hadn't mentioned it, but she'd noticed my interest. That told me everything. It wasn't just the physical evidence anymore. It was the pattern. She was actively managing the story, hiding things, erasing traces, shifting blame. But she'd slipped, and I'd seen enough to know she would slip again. So I started making copies, photos of the screen, backups of the backups, forwarding things to an account she didn't know existed. Not because I wanted to ruin her, but because I needed to protect myself from her version of events. If she could lie this easily about where she'd been, what else could she rewrite? I didn't know where this was going yet. Divorce? Confrontation? Something in between? All I knew was that our marriage, the life we'd built, wasn't real anymore. It was a stage set she walked through on her way to somewhere else. And all of it, the unraveling, the late nights, the secrets, had started with something as small as a hand on a knee at a party. Now the cracks were no longer cracks. They were fault lines. and the ground beneath us was starting to move. It's strange what we choose to forget and what we're forced to remember. After I discovered the bracelet photo next to the man's watch, I couldn't stop thinking about that room, about the things left behind, the things she never meant for me to see. I couldn't help but wonder what else was out there, what else she forgot to erase. So I went deeper. The old phone linked to her account had a synced cloud backup, photos, videos, even location history. Most of it was innocent at first. Screensh *TS of memes, recipes she'd never tried, selfies from her car. But then I found a folder inside another folder, buried like a digital secret under layers of unremarkable names. Work ref, trip notes, expense 2022. I don't know what made me click into that one specifically, but I did. Inside were 32 photos. The first few were standard hotel room *TS. A king-sized bed, champagne glasses on a nightstand, sunlight cutting through expensive curtains. Then there were selfies of her in robes, some smiling, some posed, none of which I'd ever seen before. One hit me harder than the rest. It was Sarah in a white hotel robe, her hair wet, no makeup. She was facing the mirror, phone held high, and in the reflection, behind her, a man's arm, just his arm, reached across the bed. The caption read, "This is ridiculous," face with tears of joy. She'd saved it. That crushed me more than the picture itself. The fact that she didn't just send it, didn't just live in the moment, but preserved it. Like it was special. Like it meant something. Another image showed the same room at night. Her shoes on the floor, 2 wine glasses half empty. One of his socks was clearly visible under the edge of the bed. A tiny, careless oversight, but in a picture that was clearly composed. These weren't snaps *TS. They were memories she wanted to keep. And then came the videos. The first one was short. No faces, just their voices. She was laughing, breathless, while he whispered something I couldn't quite make out. The camera jostled, someone was holding it casually, and then it cut off. It lasted maybe 13 seconds. But 13 seconds was more than enough. I recognized her tone. It was how she used to sound with me years ago. Unfiltered, warm, unguarded. That was the part that gutted me. The second video was longer. A minute, maybe more. It started with her alone, sitting at the edge of the bed, still in that white robe. The camera was on a tripod or maybe propped against a bag. She looked straight at it and smiled. "Okay, this is dumb," she said, laughing. "But I don't want to forget this." She glanced off screen, then leaned closer to the camera. "It's stupid, I know, but sometimes I feel more like myself here than I do anywhere else." She paused. "I guess what I'm trying to say is, thank you for making me feel alive again." End of video. I watched it 3 times. It wasn't the cheating that shocked me anymore. It was the *Macy. The emotion. The way she spoke like she was recording a confession. Not of guilt, but of devotion. Like this other version of her, the one in the robe, in the hotel room, in someone else's arms, that was her real life, and everything with me was just the background noise. It was a kind of betrayal I hadn't prepared for. I sat there for a long time, not crying, not shaking, just hollow. There's a point where anger gives way to stillness, where the fire burns itself out and all that's left is the ash. That's where I was, staring at my laptop, watching the life I thought I had get rewritten in real time. I started collecting everything, not just out of pain but out of necessity. I copied the photos, saved the videos, archived the messages. I organized them into folders with sterile names, evidence_A, media_1. As if giving them cold, technical labels would somehow make them hurt less. Didn't, but at least I had control over something. Later that night, when she was brushing her teeth in the bathroom, I looked at her from the hallway. She wore an oversized t-shirt, hair tied up, face clean. Ordinary. Familiar. She caught me watching and raised an eyebrow. "What?" she asked, mouth full of toothpaste. "Nothing," I said. "Just tired. Long week," she muttered, spitting into the sink. She didn't know. Not yet. She had no idea I'd seen her other world. The one where she smiled into cameras and made little digital love letters to a man named James. She thought I was still suspicious, but unsure. Still in the dark. And maybe part of me wanted to stay there a little longer. To keep pretending a while longer before things officially fell apart. Because once you acknowledge the truth out loud, there's no putting it back. But I couldn't unsee what I'd seen. The next morning, I went into the guest room and sat at the desk where she kept her old files. Tax stuff, resumes, business cards, things from before we got married. It used to be her space, her little corner of the house. I hadn't touched it in years. I opened a drawer and found a stack of old journals. I didn't even know she kept them. I wasn't planning to read them. I just held one, feeling its weight, flipping through pages with messy handwriting, doodles in the margins, receipts tucked into the covers. One note caught my eye. Some parts of me are only safe when I'm away. I didn't know what year it was from. There was no date, but the meaning felt fresh. Only safe when I'm away. I wanted to believe it was about stress, about needing space, but I knew better. I'd seen the photos. I'd heard her laugh through a locked hotel room door. And now I'd watched her confess her aliveness to a camera lens in some high-rise suite. That journal entry wasn't metaphorical. It was literal. That afternoon, I walked Max, our dog, down to the coffee shop on the corner. I needed air. I needed space she couldn't fill. Max sniffed everything with blissful ignorance, dragging me toward every bush and lamp post like the world was brand new. I envied him. On the walk home, I passed the boutique hotel 5 blocks from our house. The one we joked about once, how it looked too fancy for this neighborhood. I glanced at the lobby windows, the polished brass handles, the dark velvet chairs inside, and I wondered, had she been here too? Was James local? Was this world of secrets bigger than I imagined? When I got home, she was on a work call, laughing. That same fake, work-friendly laugh that always sounded rehearsed. I listened from the kitchen, not out of curiosity, but out of disbelief. How could she live so comfortably in both realities? How could she go from robe-clad video confessions to planning marketing campaigns in our living room, as if the two versions of her weren't tearing each other apart? But they weren't. She wasn't torn. She was thriving. It was me who was unraveling. That night I couldn't sleep. I pulled up the photos one last time, just to see if any new ones had synced. There were 3. One was her reflection in an elevator mirror, hair down, lips slightly parted. Another showed a wine bottle on a patio table, sunset behind it. And the last was a picture of 2 pairs of feet in bed. His were bigger, pale, hairy. Hers were curled toward his. No faces, but none were needed. They looked like they belonged together. And I've never felt more alone. When I finally said James's name out loud, Sarah froze. Her voice wavered as she claimed it was over and meant nothing, that it just made her feel alive again. She didn't deny it anymore. She didn't even cry, just tried to explain how lost she'd felt, how it wasn't about him, but about something she needed. But I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't sorry it happened. She was only sorry I knew. I left the house, not out of anger, but for my sanity. We exchanged honest letters for a while, both too numb to fake anything. Therapy followed, not to fix the past, but to face what came next. Maybe apart, maybe alone. The marriage we had died that night in Chicago. All it took was a moment where she acted like I didn't exist. And from then on, everything changed.